The precipitant or the business driver for this was that we had a CEO transition. I shared that. And that happened. We decided to leverage MDA a year prior. And it wasn't necessarily because we wanted to say who should be our next CEO. In fact, it wasn't for talent acquisition. But we had this cohort group of physician scientists that we knew were really some of our top leaders in the organization. And we knew that when we put a CEO in place, we would have a domino effect. And we knew that we were going to have a series of 5 to 6 transitions as a result of that CEO transition. And so we wanted to invest in our leaders, and we knew that the value creation of a good assessment and development, not only were we investing in our leaders, but we could help to develop them, and that was going to really give us some great leadership strength at the top of the house for us. And so that was really the value creation.
So let's take a deeper dive into what was this executive development experience you did? What was that? And how does that kind of fit in your own leadership journey?
So I had done several sort of leadership development activities, and I entered that, probably 18 years ago reluctantly, with the attitude that leaders are born, they're not made, and either you have it or you don't. And I learned very quickly how much you can learn if you're intentional about it, and if you are taught by experts. And then you take the feedback and work hard on a daily basis to implement what you've learned. The MDA experience was quite unique in that the sort of depth of analytics about me were significant and showed me things that I probably needed to know that hadn't appreciated in terms of my weaknesses and what strengths I had that I could capitalize on better. And that all coalesced in a meeting at the very end with Sandra, which was actually the most valuable portion of the whole experience for me, where Sandra synthesized my experiences in the simulations which are conducted on the MDA campus with the analytics about me as a thinker, as a person, what my personality traits are, what motivates me. I don't want to speak too long, but for me, sitting down with an expert who could put all that together and help me formulate a plan for improving my areas of weakness and capitalizing and utilizing my strengths was fantastic. And there were several moments during that conversation that have actually it sounds silly to use the term, but revolutionized the way I do my daily work, and I'm very appreciative for that.
So I went through the MDA process early last year as part of a team effort, if you will. My boss is Jeff Bolton. He's the CAO of Mayo Clinic, so what we call all things Mayo Clinic. And he had 10 direct reports. I'm one of the 10 direct reports. And so last year, he wanted to, as a team, for all 10 of us, as well as himself, to go through the MDA process together. And that was the first time we had done that. My leadership has evolved over the years. It helped me to understand it validated things I kind of knew about myself, but also helped me to understand on how I could contribute to the team. And I have to say, we had a session after everyone went through the process, all of us went through the process. We had a team session that Scott came and facilitated, and that probably to me was one of the most valuable aspects of the program, if you will, because Scott shared where as a group, without like naming individuals, but as a group where we were on the different personality inventories and strengths and I don't know if we call them weaknesses, opportunities for development. And it allowed us to kind of see where we fit into that. And then through that process, people really started to share their results. And it was almost this sort of bonding moment, if you will, where people started to say, I scored really high on that, or I scored really low. And then you start to look at yourself and you're like, okay, like for me, I was an outlier. I was, of the group of 11, I scored the highest on change and adaptability. I don't struggle with change at all. I'm very adaptable. But I realized my boss and the other 9 all scored very low on that. And so I was like, oh, okay, so, what does that mean for me? And then what does that mean on how I can add value to the team, right? How can I help them with this?
If you're going to prep somebody for the experience, the 2 words I would use are go and be open and be vulnerable. But I think the other thing I would tell people is the end of the MDA program is just kind of the beginning. So you get these deliverables, and you have, sort of a plan of action. And, my plan of action was very detailed. And Dawn helped me get a coach who was phenomenal, and I worked with my coach for probably 2 years, a year and a half, and the starting point for all of that coaching and the grounding point for all of the coaching was going back to the output that we got from the MDA leadership program. So I would tell people to be prepared that it's kind of the beginning, and you can stop then, and you probably will feel better about yourself, but I don't know if you'll maximize the results unless you are willing to put in this intentional effort to act on what you've learned.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because it is people like to say feedback is a gift, or having a mirror held up is wonderful, but then what will you do with it? And what does that mean for kind of next steps?
Almost all of my leadership training before this had been very much within the healthcare realm, which of course is highly relevant to where I work. But the thing that I did like about MDA, it was very evident that you work across a broad array of industries, and that there were insights that I previously had little access to that I then gained because of just the breadth of your portfolio of clients. And that was a particularly refreshing thing because, there are some commonalities between healthcare and other sectors. And I personally am quite curious in learning about that and applying them. And I think for us as an organization, we increasingly have said, what can we learn from non-healthcare organizations and take the best of and make them things that we do too?
Yeah, when you work within one industry, you get a certain view of the world, right? And sometimes when you have a chance to be out in another organization, there's a whole different mindset to some degree about how to even think about leadership or how to think about the organization in some way.
At the end of the process I went through, Scott and I had a meeting with my boss, Jeff Bolton, and went through it. The 3 of us kind of had a debrief session where I was able to share with him as well sort of my summary report as well as the action plan that Scott and I had come up with. And to answer your question, I mean, to me, that was one of the most valuable parts of it as well. I've talked a lot about kind of team dynamics, certainly that would be the top of the list, but the having that time with the 3 of us, Jeff, myself, and Scott, to sit down and go through it, and for us to be kind of aligned around, okay, what's next for me? Where do I need to focus? Where can Jeff help me in my areas of development? So he was aware of them, and so it was really kind of putting the plan together on, okay, this process is done, but how do we keep it alive? How do I keep developing, and how do we use this to further my development? So I would say that was a valuable piece to me as well.
Thank you. Thank you for remembering that question. We took a side trip, which is perfect. What about the question for you, Lois, when you think about the most valuable or how you used it?
The most valuable for me, I actually think, was some of the calibrated assessments. to just do the Hogan and some of those other things, to know that they are based on a methodology that, in the case of the Hogan, they've been used widely, so there's a lot of normative comparative data. And to have the opportunity to then, myself, look at how I ranked and what my profile was compared to what the normative data was, and just gain that insight. And then to have the opportunity to talk to Sharon Sackett, who clearly is an expert with this, to just talk about it a little more and what the implications are. That again, is not something that I have the opportunity to do very often. And I was very pleased that Mayo Clinic was willing to invest in me and give me that opportunity. And so, like Brad, I felt pretty comfortable with that being viewed by others. My feeling was I might be the last to know some of these things. Everybody else may have long ago noticed it. I just haven't known it. So be it.
One of the things that I'd be interested for the three of you who participated is, did you have any surprises, like, really? Or any ahas that you'd be willing to share with this group from the whole process?
Yeah, so I said towards the beginning that, in our session, you did something that sort of revolutionized my leadership life. And I don't think it's an overstatement of what happened. So, I'm a surgeon. I'm a perfectionist by nature, which is a good thing if you're a surgeon.
We all want you to be a perfectionist.
But it was a derailer for me in my leadership life. So we talked about my cognitive assessment. We talked about my personality traits, and then you asked me sort of what my challenges are, in my day-to-day life. And I said, well, man, I'm bogged down with emails, and I'll spend hours and hours crafting an email response. I'll spend hours and hours working on a business plan. And I'll never forget the tutelage and the advice, which was my aha moment, that perfection is good for a doctor, but 80% is good enough for a leader, and that I was being paralyzed by this need to be perfect in my communication, in my planning, and in my leadership life, and it was delaying getting the job done, and that in a leadership life, failure 20% of the time is expected and okay, and part of the way organizations and leaders and groups grow. And every single day, I remind myself of that. And if I'm doing my clinical work, I'm in my perfectionist mode, and if I'm in my leadership, I'm actually in my 80% mode, and it has really made a difference for me. So thank you for that.
Good. Thank you, Brad.
I was just going to, I commented on a little bit earlier on the positive side. I didn't realize amongst the group that I was really the change agent amongst the group, the one the most comfortable with change. And so that was very positive for me, because I thought, okay, this is where I can add value to the group. This is where I can sort of help us evolve as a team, is to get other people more comfortable with change, help with the change process, because we're going through a lot of change at Mayo Clinic all the time. And I was surprised that the group, collectively, we didn't have a higher tolerance for change. So when I kind of saw those results and we talked about it as a group, I thought, okay, that's really a role that I could play, and I still try to do that to this day. On the side, the more development side, I was surprised. I've always considered myself as someone who thinks creatively, as a kind of a bold and forward thinker. I would have rated myself probably a 7 out of 10 on that. When I got the results back, all 6 of my raters ranked me 4 out of 4 on that. They ranked that as my lowest skill. And that was a bit of a surprise for me. As I said, I saw myself as higher in that, not at the top of it, but certainly towards the top end. And what helped me with that is the reason they rated me so low on that is because I'm very much an executor. I'm someone who gets things done. And because they rated me, every one of them rated me the highest on execution and ability to get things done, that I rely on that too much. I rely on my execution skills and getting things done and sort of connecting the dots, the how versus the why. And that was one of the takeaways for me, is to be able to step back and spend more time on the why and not jump into the how. And so that was one of the development areas for me that was a little bit of an aha, was this sort of disconnect where I saw myself and where others saw me. But the reality is, when I got the feedback and saw that, I thought, okay, this is honest and critical feedback. I need to take it to heart, and I need to change my leadership, as I said, to step back and ask more of the why and not always just go to how we're going to get something done.
Mm-hmm. So it caused you to potentially show up differently as a leader, which is, different circumstances require us to show up differently as leaders, right? And so the best leaders probably have a whole array of possible options and ways that they can operate, and having this kind of process allows you to go, oh, I'm playing too much to one thing that I'm really good at. Right. So thank you for that. You were going to add something, Lois.
So one of my real takeaways was, like many people, I tend to be pretty exquisitely aware of what I think are my weaknesses, and that sometimes holds me back. And I sort of take for granted that the things I do well, everyone does well, so that's just not really, as much a differentiator. And so this was really useful to say, maybe I should lean in a little bit and not wait till I have 110% of the experience of other people. But when I have 90% of the experience, I can go for it. So thank you.
Absolutely. And you did at one point in your career, when you went for it at the time that you were surprised to become the leader, so to speak. By going through a process where you learn a way of thinking about your leadership, does that now influence how you look at other people on your team in terms of their leadership? So maybe one of you could speak to that.
So I'll answer that very simply. Yes. I think, especially in my background is my, formal academic training is a medical degree. So I don't have an MBA. I don't have any administrative training. And I do believe that this experience just sharpened my ability to understand leadership, not only for myself, but for those that I work with, and to assist them in being effective. So I think that there is quite a rich return.
I would say for myself, what it opened my eyes to is that because my focus in leadership has been historically on sort of operational efficiency, execution, driving results, I have surrounded myself with similar people. So when we look at our operations in Arizona, it's a very well-run machine. I mean, it really is, by all accounts. But
I'll vouch for that.
Yeah, you can vouch for that. What I don't have at my leadership table here are the bold and forward thinkers, the innovators, the visionary people. And we just had this conversation the other day, and we have a new CEO in Arizona. Our previous CEO retired, and we have a new CEO who's very similar to myself. He's a surgeon. He's an executor. He's a planner. We're going to, you don't go into surgery to be surprised. And his leadership, his leadership is the same way. Like, I'm not going to, I need to be prepared. We need to do all these things. And so now we have two sort of execution people in leadership. And I had this conversation with him, is we need to find those visionary thinkers, the bold thinkers, the creative innovators, and we need to surround ourselves with them. Because as we look at the next 10 years, it's going to be a different skill set that we need as an organization than the past 10 years. Our past 10 years has really been on growth in our facilities, growth in our practice, growth in our staff. As we look to 2030 in the new plan, it's going to be, how do we transform what we do by doing it differently, by being bold, by being innovative. And so it's a conversation we're having, and today is about how do we how do we not only change ourselves, but bring in talents that can push us in that direction as well.
I mean, thanks for that example, because we all know that it's human nature to like people who are like ourselves. And sometimes when I'm doing an interview, I'll put in the margin, be careful, you like her. You know, it's like, because I won't do as tough an interview because I'm going to make some assumptions about what this individual's like, which may or may not be right. Brad, you wanted to add to this as well, Dr. Leibovich.
Well, I think that's a very insightful question, and I would say that 50% of the value that I got from going through this process was for me, and the other 50% was making me a better mentor, coach, identifier of talent, builder of talent from what I've learned through the process. So I think it's at least as valuable for the individual as it is for the individuals that person interacts with.
And so what's really important for us is, as an organization, is to say, how do we surround them with the right resources to accelerate their performance? And so what it did for us is really go, how do we surround them to be as successful as possible?
Need help achieving high-performance leadership? Let's begin a conversation.